Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unlocking the mysteries of the mind by diving right into the greatest, honestly most fascinating paradox in all of cognitive psychology. You see, the mind is this enormously complex system, but it holds a totally unique position in science. Why? Because by necessity, we have to use the mind as the very instrument to study itself. It's this bizarre recursive loop that has literally stumped thinkers for centuries.
Think about that for a second. How can we possibly turn our attention inward to objectively study our own mental life and consciousness? It's kind of like trying to look directly at your own eyeballs without a mirror. While physicists can study atoms and biologists can study cells, cognitive psychologists have the near impossible task of exploring the ineffable mind stuff that makes us who we are. So today we are going to break down this mystery through a series of mind-bending thought experiments drawn right from the foundations of cognitive psychology. Section 1. The foundation, the mind-body problem. To really set the stakes for our debate today, we first have to ask, what exactly is the relationship between our mental events, your hopes, your desires, that vivid feeling of pain, and the physical, fleshy brain sitting inside your skull?
Okay, let's dive right into this. The oldest and perhaps most intuitive stance is dualism. Cartesian dualism, championed by René Descartes, proposes that the mind and the body are two completely different kinds of entities. Physical matter has a well-defined position. It has specific mass and volume. You can locate a physical brain. But mental states, if I ask you for the exact coordinates, or say the weight of your belief, or your sudden desire for a sandwich, it simply doesn't compute. Dualism argues they don't have physical extension. They're a completely separate mental substance.
But modern science heavily favors monism, specifically materialism, the idea that only physical stuff exists. And this brilliantly illustrates a huge divide within materialism itself. On the one hand, you have reductive materialism or mind-brain identity theory, which says mental events simply are material brain events. Saying I'm hungry is just a high-level, everyday way of describing neural firing in your lateral hypothalamus. But on the other side, eliminative materialism takes a far more radical approach. It argues our current, everyday concepts of desire or hunger are so fundamentally flawed that they'll eventually be entirely eliminated by neuroscience. Just like biology threw out the mystical concept of vitalism, eliminative materialists believe we will one day stop talking about thoughts entirely and only speak in pure neurological data. So no more saying you're hangry, you'll just state that your blood sugar drops are triggering aggressive synaptic responses.
And then we have functionalism, which is absolutely crucial. It's the bedrock of modern computational theories of mind. Functionalism defines mental states not by the physical stuff they're made of, but by their causal relations, their inputs, outputs, and connections to other states. This introduces a fascinating concept called multiple realizability. Basically, just like there are 100 different ways to build a thermostat that all do the exact same job, there could be alien creatures with silicon molecules instead of carbon, or even a highly complex computer that could genuinely hold conscious mental states. If the functional architecture connects the same way, the consciousness is real. Section 2. The perspective shift. Do you see my red? This brings us to a pretty aggressive pivot into the problem of other minds. Let me ask you directly, how do you actually know anyone else is conscious? You only have direct first-person access to your own subjective experience. How do you know I'm not just a highly complex biological robot simulating human behavior? For that matter, how do I know you truly see the world exactly the way I see it?
Now, what's really interesting about these color space models is how perfectly they visualize this exact problem using the famous inverted spectrum argument. Imagine your color experience is exactly like mine, except it is secretly reversed. If we apply a red-green reversal, essentially reflecting the color space about the blue-yellow plane, my internal experience of green is your internal experience of red. But here's the catch. We both look at a fire engine, and we both call it red. We both agree that focal blue is darker than focal yellow. Your behavior and your language are identical to mine, but your subjective, internal world is fundamentally inverted. You might think this is just an impossible philosophical parlor trick, but genetics prove that pseudo-normal color perception is entirely biologically possible. Notice how some people are red-green colorblind because their long wavelength cones have medium wavelength pigment, or vice versa. But if someone genetically inherited both forms of red-green colorblindness simultaneously, their L cones would have M pigment, and M cones would have L pigment. To put that into perspective, statistically speaking, roughly 14 out of every 10,000 males theoretically have this precise genetic makeup. They would be literal red-green reversed trichromats. It absolutely blows the mind to realize that entirely different subjective experiences can hide flawlessly behind completely identical normal behavior. Nobody has ever detected one of these people by behavioral means because their output perfectly matches everyone else's.
Section 3. The machine test. Can machines think? If subjective experience is so perfectly hidden behind behavior, how does science attempt to objectively test for consciousness? Well, we have to look at the ultimate machine test. Back in 1950, Alan Turing, the inventor of the digital computer, set up an imitation game to bypass all the philosophical haggling. The steps are simple and strict. An interrogator communicates via text terminal with subject A, a human, and subject B, a computer. The interrogator asks them anything, to play chess, write poetry, describe a TV show. If the interrogator simply cannot guess which is the human and which is the computer based on their behavioral outputs, Turing asserted the machine should be judged intelligent.
But here is the critical flaw in using behavior as our only metric. Passing Turing's test is not a sufficient condition for consciousness. A perfectly programmed automaton, a zombie essentially, could easily simulate every single aspect of human behavior. It could act entirely conscious, give brilliant answers, and pass the test with flying colors, all without having a single genuine inner experience or spark of phenomenological awareness. As we just saw with the colors, behavior does not guarantee the inner experience of consciousness.
Section 4. The climax. Where is your mind? We are now going to put everything we've learned about the mind-body problem to the ultimate test, using philosopher Daniel C. Dennett's wild, incredibly detailed sci-fi thought experiment known simply as, Where Am I? Let me set the scene for this thrilling premise. The Pentagon recruits Dennett for a highly dangerous secret project involving a supersonic tunneling underground device, or, and yes, the Pentagon actually named it this, STUD. The mission? Retrieve an experimental atomic warhead lodged a mile deep under Tulsa, Oklahoma. The danger? Well, the warhead emits a unique radiation that causes severe, deadly abnormalities strictly to brain tissue, but leaves the rest of the physical body completely unharmed.
So the crucial point is the completely wild solution the Pentagon scientists come up with. They surgically remove Dennett's brain. The brain, which Dennett names Yorick, is placed in a sparkling life support vat in Houston, Texas. Millions of micro-miniaturized radio transceivers are spliced into his severed nerve endings, flawlessly linking Yorick the brain in Houston to his body, named Hamlet, heading down to Tulsa.
Imagine waking up from this surgery. You open your eyes, look through a glass vat, and you are staring directly at your own physical grain floating in bubbling fluid. Dennett asks himself, where am I? When he thinks, here I am, where is that thought actually taking place? Is it in the vat with Yorick, the physical seat of his soul, or is it outside the vat, where his body stands staring? He tries to project his point of view into the vat, but he just can't do it. His sense of location is entirely tied to his body's perspective, not his brain's location.
The mission proceeds. Dennett's body, Hamlet, descends into the radioactive hole under Tulsa. He's working on the warhead with a cutting torch when, suddenly, a transceiver breaks. He goes stone deaf. A few minutes later, his vocal apparatus is paralyzed. Then, his right arm goes limp. Then, blindness. Deep underground, he is completely severed from his sensory links, deaf, dumb, and blind.
Then the very last radio link breaks. Dennett realizes his body in Tulsa is effectively dead, but he is still awake. Instantly, his perspective and consciousness snap back to the disembodied brain, Yorick, sitting in the vat in Houston. Did his soul or his mind just travel at the speed of light from Tulsa to Houston without gaining any mass? It's a terrifying, dizzying shift in perspective that perfectly highlights the immateriality of the mind and the bizarre reality of functionalism.
But it doesn't end there. He wakes up a year later in a new body, and the scientists reveal the ultimate twist. Before the mission, they had actually created a giant computer program that perfectly duplicated his brain's entire information processing structure. They called the biological brain Yorick, and the exact computer duplicate Hubert. They let Hubert drive the new body, and Dennett couldn't even tell the difference. He had a biological brain and a completely digital backup, both functioning identically.
And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate existential crisis. Dennett now has a biological brain, Yorick, and a computer brain, Hubert, both perfectly capable of driving a body. What if they gave each brain its own separate body at the exact same time? As Dennett asks, if there were two bodies, which would the world recognize as the true Dennett? Which one would you be? The biological one simply because it was there first, or the identical digital duplicate?
It leaves us completely untethered from our basic assumptions of identity.
It forces us to realize that mind, body, and consciousness are far more strangely intertwined or entirely separate than we ever dared to imagine. So I'll leave you with this provocative final thought. If your biological brain is safely floating in a vacuum Texas, but your living, breathing body is walking around a mile underground in Oklahoma, where exactly are you?